The study smelled faintly of aged parchment and lavender polish, the familiar sense of Grandmother Marguerite's world. Clara stood near the carved oak desk, its surface still scattered with handwritten letters, silver-framed photographs, and the last spectacles Marguerite had set aside before death claimed her. Outside, the autumn sun threw angled light through the tall leaded windows, catching the dust motes that drifted in solemn silence. Every corner of the chateau breathed history, but none felt as oppressive as this room, where generations of Vayrons had made their decisions, sealed their fates, and judged their kin. Clara had come seeking solace, but instead she found Marcus waiting, arms crossed, expression as hard as the ancestral portraits that lined the paneled walls. His presence alone tightened the air. He looked too much like their late grandfather, sharp jaw, narrow gaze, a face trained to cut others down. "You shouldn't linger here," Marcus said, his tone clipped, echoing with authority he did not deserve. This was Marguerite's sanctum, and it belongs to the bloodline now, to the true heirs. Clara stiffened. "I am her granddaughter, you know that." His lips curved, not in amusement, but in disdain. "Are you? Or have you just been pretending all along?" The words hit harder than she expected, as if he had struck her across the chest. Pretending? The insult crawled under her skin. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady, though her pulse beat like war drums in her ears. Marcus took a slow step forward, the hush of his polished shoes against the rug pulling her deeper into his orbit. "You always thought Marguerite favored you because of your charm. But what if I told you she knew something you didn't? What if she pitied you?" Clara's throat tightened. He was needling her, deliberately stirring shadows, yet some part of her recoiled, not with anger, but with fear, a fear that his words carried fragments of truth. "You're speaking nonsense," she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. "Nonsense?" Marcus tilted his head toward the grand portrait above the fireplace. Marguerite in her youth, proud and regal, painted in silks the color of midnight. Look at her. Look at yourself. Do you really see the same blood staring back at you? Because I don't. Clara turned away, unable to meet the piercing weight of his stare. The words lodged inside her chest like shards of glass. She remembered her grandmother's last conversation, the strange way Marguerite's hand had tightened around hers, whispering a cryptic line. Trust what lies beneath appearances. At the time, Clara thought it was the rambling of a dying woman. Now, in Marcus's cruel mouth, it sounded like a warning. He leaned closer, lowering his voice until it coiled through her bones. "The truth always comes out, Clara, and when it does, we'll see who really belongs to the Veyron name, and who does." His footsteps receded, the heavy door closing behind him with a resonant thud. Alone again in the study, Clara pressed her palms against the desk, struggling to steady herself. She had come to the chateau seeking comfort in Marguerite's memory, but left with doubt rising like storm clouds. For the first time, she wondered if Marcus's venom was more than spite. What if the foundations of her life had been built on a lie? The Veyron dynasty had not been built on romance or chance, but on discipline, poured as carefully as their wines. Generations ago, a modest vineyard nestled in the rolling hills of Bordeaux had grown into a global empire under the stern vision of Henri Veyron, Clara's great-grandfather. His descendants inherited not just land and wealth, but a legacy so demanding it sometimes seemed more prison than privilege. Each bottle that bore the Veyron crest carried the weight of centuries, and each child born into the family carried expectations as heavy as the oak barrels that lined their cellars. For Marcus, those expectations were fuel. He thrived under the mantle of responsibility, wearing it like armor. Precision, tradition, control. He was the perfect son of the dynasty, quick to enforce its codes, quicker still to expose those who strayed. To him, the family's history was scripture, and he, its most faithful disciple. His posture, his speech, his every choice carried the air of inevitability. Marcus would inherit not only the vineyards but also the authority to dictate what it meant to be a Veyron. Adrian, by contrast, seemed carved from different wood. Though equally born into privilege, he bristled against its formality. Where Marcus saw the family estate as a monument to preserve, Adrian saw a gilded cage. He spoke often of travel, of opening modern ventures, of blending tradition with innovation. His laughter was looser, his friendships less calculated, his charm carrying him through rooms Marcus could only dominate. The brothers mirrored the two faces of the dynasty, one bound to the past, the other hungry for a future beyond its walls. Clara had never belonged to either face. Though raised within the chateau, she had always been a step removed, her place in the family as fragile as glass. She had grown up hearing subtle corrections in her speech, veiled criticisms of her choices, and reminders that she was different. Her cousins bore the family name like a badge of honor, while Clara carried it like an ill-fitting cloak, aware that it never seemed to rest comfortably on her shoulders. At dinners beneath chandeliers heavy with crystal, she had watched Marcus and Adrian spar with words sharpened by rivalry, the rest of the family quietly choosing sides. Clara was seldom asked her opinion, her contributions drowned beneath the weight of their voices. To Marcus, she was little more than a tolerated presence, a guest at her own table. To Adrian, she was someone to be shielded when the atmosphere grew tense, though even his warmth carried an edge of pity she despised. The vineyards, the chateau, the legacy itself, all of it seemed to circle around her while never truly including her. Grandmother Marguerite had been the only one who spoke to her as if she belonged, reminding Clara that love was not less real for being unconventional. Now that Marguerite was gone, Clara felt the old isolation return with a sharper sting. The dynasty's banners still fluttered proudly over the chateau, but inside its walls Clara felt less like an heir and more like an interloper, caught between Marcus's scrutiny and Adrian's sympathy. The weight of the Veyron name pressed against her, as heavily as the stone walls surrounding her, a legacy both magnificent and suffocating. The café was tucked away on a narrow street in Bordeaux, its awning striped in fading red and white, its windows fogged by the chill of late autumn. Clara slid into a corner booth, where her mother was already waiting, hands wrapped tightly around a porcelain cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. There was a tremor in her mother's fingers, a weariness in her eyes that no amount of careful grooming could conceal. For a long moment, neither spoke. The clatter of cutlery and muted conversations of other patrons filled the silence. Clara had come prepared for half-truths, for excuses, for another round of Marcus's venom made palatable by her mother's soothing words. But what she found instead was fear. "I never wanted it to come out like this," her mother whispered at last, her voice raw. "Not from Marcus's mouth. Not with his cruelty." Clara's throat tightened. "Then tell me yourself. Is it true? Am I not who I thought I was?" Her mother closed her eyes as if bracing for a storm, then leaned forward, lowering her voice to a near whisper. "Clara, the man you have called cousin all your life, Adrian, is your father." The words sliced through the air, brutal in their simplicity. For a heartbeat, Clara felt the ground tilt beneath her, as if the café itself had spun off its axis. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself, though nothing could steady the tempest inside. "That's not possible," she said, but even as she spoke, fragments of memory crashed back. Adrian's warmth, his inexplicable protectiveness, the way he sometimes looked at her with an expression too heavy to be mere kindness. She had dismissed it as eccentricity. Now it reeked of truth. Her mother's eyes brimmed with tears. "It was years ago, before I married your supposed father. Adrian and we were young, foolish, in love, but the family would never have allowed it. The dynasty demanded order, demanded Marcus as heir, demanded appearances be kept intact. Adrian was restless, reckless. I chose stability, for your sake, or at least I thought I did." Clara's breath came sharp, uneven. "So all this time, Marcus's scorn, the family's coldness, My feeling like an outsider, it was because I was never Marcus's equal? Because I was Adrian's secret? Her mother flinched at the bitterness in her tone. I thought I was protecting you, protecting Adrian. If the truth had been known, the family would have torn us apart. You would have been branded illegitimate. You would have been cast out. And instead, I grew up a ghost in my own home, Clara said flatly. Her mother reached for her hand, but Clara pulled back, the contact too painful. The walls of the cafe seemed to close in, the murmurs of strangers blurring as her heart thundered. The truth had finally surfaced, but instead of bringing clarity, it fractured everything. She wasn't just a Veyron outsider now. She was the forbidden child of the very man Marcus sought to eclipse. The dynasty had been built on vines and stone, but Clarissa's place in it was built on a lie. Adrian's apartment could not have been further from the grandeur of the Veyron chateau. Instead of chandeliers and gilt-framed portraits, his modest space above a bookshop in the old quarter of Bordeaux was lined with shelves sagging under the weight of historical tomes, journals, and artifacts collected over decades of research. The faint aroma of ink, old leather, and strong coffee filled the air. Where Marcus lived, surrounded by polished legacy, Adrian lived enveloped in stories of other dynasties, other fallen empires, other families who had wrestled with truth and power. Clara hesitated at the threshold, her pulse unsteady, before Adrian himself appeared. He was older, yes, but still carried the warmth she remembered from childhood, the gentler cousin who had shielded her from Marcus's sharp edges at family dinners, the one who had asked her about her studies when no one else cared. Only now, standing before him, she recognized the flicker of recognition in his eyes, not just affection, but something deeper. "You seem troubled," he said softly, ushering her inside. "Is this about Marguerite's estate? Marcus has been circling like a hawk, I know." Clara sat on a worn leather chair, her hands knotted in her lap. "It's more than the estate. It's everything." She forced herself to meet his gaze. "I've learned the truth. About you. About me." The pause stretched, his expression shifting from guarded calm to startled stillness. For a heartbeat, she saw the boy he must have been, impulsive, reckless, filled with love he hadn't been allowed to claim. "Your mother told you," he murmured, more statement than question. Clara nodded. "She said you were my father." Adrian exhaled, a sound heavy with years of silence. He crossed the room slowly, as if approaching something sacred, and sank into the chair opposite her. "I never knew for certain. I suspected, once or twice, when Marguerite's eyes lingered on you, when I saw my own features mirrored back. But Catherine never said a word. And I respected the life she chose, even if it wasn't mine." Clara swallowed, her voice trembling. "Then what now? Marcus wants me erased from the inheritance. He's already planting doubts. If I don't prove I belong, I'll lose everything Marguerite intended for me." For a moment, Adrian said nothing, his eyes scanning the shelves, as if the answer might be hidden among the relics. Finally, he shook his head. "A DNA test would satisfy Marcus, but it would reduce this to science, to numbers. The Veyrons are older than that. Legacy here has always been carried not in blood alone, but in heirlooms, in history. Your grandmother understood that." He rose, crossing to a cabinet at the far end of the room. From it, he withdrew a velvet-wrapped object. Unfolding the cloth, he revealed a small pendant, silver, worn smooth by generations of touch. The crest of the Veyron vineyard glimmered faintly in its center. "This," he said, placing it gently in Clara's hand, "was Marguerite's gift to me when I was a boy. She told me it would one day find its way to the rightful heir. Not the chosen heir, but the true one. If she gave you something to match this, something only she and you shared, then no court, no Marcus, no Harrison will be able to deny it. The legacy isn't written in papers, Clara. It's written in trust, in what Marguerite left behind." Clara's fingers curled around the pendant, the metal warm against her palm. For the first time since her world had cracked open, she felt not only doubt, but a glimmer of belonging. The chateau seemed quieter than usual that evening, its long corridors hushed as if holding their breath. Clara moved with cautious steps, guided less by certainty than by instinct. Marguerite's parting words echoing in her mind, "Trust what lies beneath appearances." Something about that phrase had refused to let her sleep. Back in her grandmother's study, Clara's eyes roamed the room, not searching for comfort this time, but for secrets. She had spent hours here as a child, tracing the patterns in the carved desk, listening to Marguerite's stories of vineyards and dynasties. Now, every object seemed to hold new significance, every drawer a possible vessel of truth. Her fingers brushed along the underside of the desk, pausing when she felt an unfamiliar notch. Pressing it, a hidden compartment slid open with a faint click. Inside lay two objects: a leather-bound diary, its edges frayed with age, and a small velvet pouch. Clara's heart raced as she lifted them out, her hands trembling. She opened the pouch first. Nestled inside was a delicate silver locket engraved with the Veyron crest, identical in style to the pendant Adrian had shown her, yet smaller, more intimate. When she pressed the clasp, it opened to reveal two miniature portraits, one of Marguerite in her youth, the other unmistakably of Adrian. A chill swept through Clara. The locket wasn't just jewelry, it was a message, carefully hidden until the right hands found it. Her pulse quickened as she turned to the diary. Marguerite's handwriting filled the pages, elegant but firm, each word carrying the authority of a woman who had ruled her household and her family with quiet certainty. Clara flipped through years of entries until her breath caught at a passage marked by a folded slip of ribbon. "Catherine came to me today, burdened by secrets. I saw the fear in her eyes when she spoke of her child. My child's child, though the world will never know. She carries Adrian's blood, not Douglas's, though appearances demand otherwise. I swore I would protect them both, even from the family itself." Clara read the words again and again, her hands tightening around the fragile paper. Marguerite had known, not suspected. Known. And she had chosen silence, shielding Clara while letting Marcus and Douglas believe their version of the truth. Another entry, months later, deepened the revelation. Douglas grows restless, more ruthless. He clings to the Blackwell inheritance as though it defines him. But blood cannot be forged through paper or law. When the time comes, Clara must know who she is. She is Adrian's daughter, and therefore mine in every way that matters. She will be the one to carry what remains of honor in this family. Clara's chest ached, torn between grief and vindication. Her grandmother's love had never been blind favoritism. It had been recognition. Quiet affirmation of a truth Clara herself had never imagined. But the diary also carried warnings. Toward its final pages, Marguerite wrote with a darker hand, "There will be a reckoning when I am gone. The fortune, the vineyards, the very name will be contested. Marcus will not yield, nor will Douglas. If Clara is to survive what is coming, she must have courage, and she must trust the tokens I've left behind." Clara closed the diary, pressing it against her chest, as if Marguerite's presence lingered in the ink. The locket gleamed softly in her palm, twin to Adrian's pendant, proof stronger than any laboratory could provide. The foreshadowing was clear. The inheritance battle was no longer just possible, it was inevitable. The grand dining hall of the Veyron Chateau was prepared not for feasting, but for judgment. Once the stage of glittering banquets and toasts to the vineyard's success, it now carried a somber weight. Heavy velvet curtains muted the late afternoon sun, while candelabras cast long, uncertain shadows across the oak-paneled walls. The portraits of past patriarchs and matriarchs seemed to watch with cold scrutiny, their painted eyes demanding that the family name be preserved at any cost. At the far end of the table sat Beatrice Hale, the family's long-time lawyer, her portfolio neatly arranged before her. With her sharp suit and sharper expression, she looked less like a guest of the Veyrons and more like an executioner summoned to preside. To her right was Marcus, his confidence radiating like a weapon, his chin lifted as though the verdict had already been delivered in his favor. The extended family filled the chairs along the table's length, murmuring among themselves, wineglasses untouched. Adrian sat quietly near the center, his gaze lowered, while Clara entered last, every step echoing in the cavernous room. She felt the sting of dozens of eyes on her, weighing her worth. Beatrice cleared her throat, silencing the whispers. "We are gathered to review the provisions of Madame Marguerite's estate, but before we proceed, Marcus has raised concerns regarding the legitimacy of one beneficiary." The words fell like a blade. Clara's pulse quickened, though she forced herself to sit tall. Marcus rose with theatrical deliberation, his tailored jacket catching the candlelight. "For years," he began, his voice smooth yet cutting, "we have indulged Clara as if she were one of us. Out of kindness, out of deference to Marguerite's sentimental affections. But sentiment does not rewrite bloodlines. And in matters of inheritance, only bloodlines matter." A ripple of murmurs spread through the hall. Clara clenched her fists under the table, her throat tightening. "She's not a true Veyron," Marcus declared, his voice louder now, echoing against the high ceiling. "My cousin by name, perhaps, but not by blood. Margaret may have doted on her, but favoritism does not equal legitimacy. If we allow outsiders to claim this legacy, then what is the worth of our family at all?" Clara's cheeks burned as the words struck. She glanced toward Adrian, but his expression was unreadable, his silence heavy with conflict. Beatrice leaned forward, her tone cool. "Marcus raises a serious question. The trust clearly requires direct descent. If there is reasonable doubt regarding Clara's lineage, the validity of her claim must be examined. Without proof, her inclusion risks violation of the trust itself." The humiliation was total. Marcus had turned the family's attention into a tribunal, and Clara stood accused without defense. The cousins who once ignored her now whispered behind their hands, their eyes flickering between Marcus's certainty and Clara's stillness. Marcus pressed his advantage, his lips curving into a cruel smile. "Clara has always been different, lacking the discipline of the Veyrons, lacking the resemblance, lacking the drive. Perhaps now we know why. She does not carry our name in her veins." Laughter rippled faintly from one end of the table, quickly hushed but enough to twist the knife deeper. Clara sat rigid, fighting back tears that threatened to rise. She wanted to shout, to brandish the diary, the locket, the pendant, but she knew instinctively this was not the moment. Not yet. Marcus's triumph was premature, and Marguerite's foresight had given Clara weapons he did not yet suspect. Still, the sting of public humiliation seared her. In front of the family, the portraits, the lawyer, Marcus had stripped her identity bare. And yet, beneath the shame, another emotion stirred, a quiet, gathering defiance. The inheritance battle had begun. The silence that followed Marcus's attack was thick, suffocating, until Clara rose from her chair. The candelabra flames flickered as she steadied her breath, her voice carrying not with force but with clarity. "You speak of bloodlines, Marcus," she said, meeting his gaze. "Then let us speak of truth." From her satchel, she drew the leather-bound diary and laid it gently on the table before Beatrice Hale. Gasps rippled through the room as the lawyer unfolded the worn pages, her sharp eyes scanning Marguerite's handwriting. "These are entries in Grandmother Marguerite's own hand," Clara continued, her voice steady now. "She knew who I was. She knew I was Adrian's daughter, her blood granddaughter. She chose to protect that truth because she understood what this family would do to me if it came out sooner." The room erupted in murmurs, cousins leaning forward, uncles and aunts whispering furiously. Marcus scoffed, waving dismissively. "Convenient fiction. A few scribbles in a diary do not make you a Veyron. Clara's hand tightened around the second object she carried. She opened her palm, revealing the silver locket. Candlelight gleamed off its engraved crest. Then perhaps this will. Marguerite gave this to me, and Adrian has its twin. All eyes turned to Adrian, who rose slowly from his chair. From his pocket he withdrew the pendant Clara had seen in his apartment. He placed it beside hers, the two heirlooms catching the firelight in identical reflection. Marguerite entrusted us with these, Adrian said, his voice low but unyielding, because she knew the truth. Clara is my daughter, and therefore Marguerite's only blood granddaughter. That cannot be erased by Marcus's arrogance or Beatrice's legal maneuvers. The hall rang with raised voices, some in shock, others in protest. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. Lies. All of it. You're trying to steal what has always been mine. But before Beatrice could intervene, Adrian's voice cut clean through the noise. Is it still yours, Marcus? Do you dare demand we honor bloodline clauses when you yourself have no Veyron blood to claim? The words landed like thunder. Confusion swept the room. Marcus's face drained of color. What nonsense is this? Adrian's eyes locked on his brother. You were adopted, Marcus, brought into this family as an infant after Marguerite's miscarriages. The truth was buried but not lost. I have the records. He held up a folder. Documents the lawyer had not expected. Papers Marcus had feared would surface. Gasps erupted as relatives leaned forward to see the evidence. Beatrice paled, her lips pressed into a thin line. If this is true, she began, but her words were drowned out by chaos. Cousins rose to their feet, voices clashing, questions flying like sparks. Marcus shouted denials, his composure shredded. He looked to Beatrice for rescue, but even she could not shield him now. Clara stood motionless in the storm, her locket burning warm in her palm. For the first time, Marcus's power faltered. For the first time, truth held more weight than intimidation. The Veyron dynasty had cracked wide open. The chaos of the dining hall spilled late into the night, but by dawn it was over. The will had been read, the evidence weighed, and the verdict delivered. Clara and Adrian, as Marguerite's true bloodline, would inherit the vineyards and the chateau. Marcus had left in a storm of fury, his footsteps echoing like thunder through the marble corridors. His face, once so sure of victory, had twisted in disbelief and rage. The doors slammed behind him, leaving silence in his wake. The silence of a man stripped not only of wealth, but of identity. Clara remained at the table as relatives slowly dispersed, their eyes shifting when they met hers. Where once they had dismissed her, now they regarded her with unease, even respect. Her brothers approached at last. You were braver than any of us, one cousin admitted, his voice subdued. Another added, perhaps we judged you too quickly. Clara accepted their words with quiet grace, though she knew respect offered in hindsight carried less weight than love given freely. Still, it was a beginning. Adrian stayed near her side, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, an anchor in the storm. There were no grand declarations between them, no speeches, just the simple truth finally acknowledged. Father and daughter, united after years of silence. Later, when the house was still and the dust of conflict settled, Clara walked alone into the vineyards. The first light of dawn spread across the rows of vines, painting the leaves in shades of gold and green. The air was crisp with earth and dew, alive with the same scents she had known since childhood. For the first time, those vines did not feel foreign. They were not Marcus's inheritance, not Douglas's pride, not a legacy dangled out of reach. They were hers. Not because of blood proven or documents signed, but because Marguerite had believed in her, because Adrian had claimed her, and because she finally believed in herself. She paused at the edge of the vineyard, the locket warm against her chest, its weight now a promise rather than a burden. The ghosts of Marguerite and all the ancestors seemed to linger in the stillness, watching, waiting, judging. Clara lifted her chin, no longer shrinking under their gaze. Belonging had never been gifted to her. It had been fought for, endured, earned. And now, as the morning sun broke fully over the vines, Clara felt it at last. Not the brittle pride of Marcus, not the hollow armor of Douglas, but a quiet certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The vineyard stretched before her, endless rows glistening with dew, a kingdom reborn. And at its heart stood Clara Veyron, not an outsider, not an impostor, but the rightful heir to both legacy and truth.